and get started. Hopefully we'll have some more members trickle in. It's getting to be pretty busy around here now. We have committee rules to adopt, but we'll pause on that until we get a quorum, and we'll start out with a prayer. Senator Merritt, do you mind offering up a prayer for us? What mic are you?
I am on 5. It's the first time I've done one, but we'll go for it. Everybody bow your knee. Dear Lord, I thank you for letting us join here today. I ask that you guide our decisions and our conversations in a spirit of goodwill and for the good of the people. In your name I ask for this. Amen.
Thank you. All right, my name's Larry Walker. I'm proud to be the new chairman of the Senate Insurance and Labor Committee. Excited to be work with you all as we try to craft smart public policy for Georgia. I want us to take a minute and let the committee members that are here briefly introduce themselves, and I'll start to my right with Senator Kirkpatrick. Tell us what number? 10? 9? You know the drill.
Yeah, I'm Kay Kirkpatrick. I represent Senate District 32, which is Cobb and Cherokee counties, and happy to be here. Thank you.
I'm Marty Harbin, District 16, Fayette, Spalding, Lamar, and Pike County. 45 years in the insurance business, so I've seen a little bit of it, and glad to be here.
My name is Senator Nikki Merritt. I serve the 9th District in Gwinnett County. That is Lawrenceville, Grayson, and Lilburn. And I come from a 23-year background in labor, CWA 3204. So happy to be with y'all today.
I'm Senator Randy Robertson, District 29. I represent Troup County, Meriwether County, Harris County, and half of Muskogee County, which is Columbus. Spent 31 years in law enforcement.
All right, thank you. Senator Lucas, glad to have you with us. If you would introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about your district.
David Lucas, District 26, represent 85% of Bibb County. All the Twiggs, all the Wilkerson, all the Hancock, all the Washington, and all the Johnson County. And I guess you said my job has been the legislature. I've been in it for 47 years. You're 9 years old.
No, he wasn't.
Senator Lucas, you started in the House, served with my father, and I remember meeting you when I was about 7 or 8 years old. And you made it a big impression on me then, and you still do today. So glad to have you with us. I'm Larry Walker. I represent Senate District 20, which is Middle Georgia. I live in Houston County and have about a third or so of Houston County, and then I have all of Pulaski, Bleckley, Laurens, Dooley, Wilcox, Dodge, and Treutlen counties. And like Senator Harbin, I'm in the insurance business. I've got an insurance agency much smaller than Senator Harbin's in Perry, but I've been in the insurance agency business for 27 years, and it's been a good career and a good industry to work in. All right, we've got some real good presentations today, and we'll, hey, Senator Harbison.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir. And I'm gonna call on Stacy Freeman to introduce our first presenter. I think y'all will find it interesting. Thank you.
I think it's on. Is it on there? All right, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Stacy Freeman. I represent the American Property Casualty Insurers Association of America. It's a national property and casualty trade association, approximately 1,000 member companies, and they write roughly 50% of the property casualty market in Georgia, everything from workers' compensation, homeowners, to private passenger auto. But the reason I'm here today is we have a guest, Dr. Bob Hartwig from the Risk Management School at the University of South Carolina, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about the factors that go into the rates that you see for private passenger automobile. I know you've heard about the facts that rates are up. He's going to be able to talk about the details of just why that is and what the factors are that go into those rates. So again, we'll appreciate your time, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Hartwig. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stacy, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, and pleasure to meet all of you, members of the committee. A lot of things to go through here today, and we've all heard a lot about inflation. We've heard about how this is impacting automobile insurance rates in Georgia and around the country. So I'm here to tell you exactly what's going on here in the state of Georgia, what is driving auto insurance rates today. And there's a lot at play here, and so I'm going to begin by giving you a very quick analysis of the competitive profile here in the state of Georgia in terms of number of carriers competing for your business, for instance, in the private passenger auto business. And then we'll talk about some the environment in which insurance operates here in the state of Georgia. And sadly, I've got to tell you that Georgia is in the midst of an epidemic on the highways and byways of deaths. The number of deaths on the highways, severe accidents for a variety of reasons, is quite frankly going through the roof. A lot of this is being reflected in terms of the average cost per claim, claim severity. This is driving up loss ratios, in other words, what insurers are paying out relative to what they take in here in the state of Georgia, and it's deteriorating rapidly. And so, but another factor there, of course, is inflation. We've all heard about inflation that's impacting the cost of just about everything, including everything that goes into the price of automobile insurance, and I'll be happy to take your questions as well. So, first, some good news. I'm very happy to say that Georgia is a very competitive auto insurance market today. More than 200 auto insurers compete for business throughout the state of Georgia, about $11 billion in premium on 4 million vehicles, and growing every day in this state. So it is a large, vigorous, competitive auto insurance market. So that's great news. And we'd like to keep it that way, of course. And this isn't just my say-so. This is according to Department of Justice an analysis using a traditional Department of Justice measure of competitiveness called the Herfindahl Index. And according to that index, the market is not concentrated. In fact, it would be considered highly competitive by a Department of Justice standards. So the conclusion there, and the moral of the story, is that Georgia's auto insurance markets are very, very competitive, and there's no evidence at all that a lack of competition or anything related to the models being used by insurers or anything related to the approval process associated with this state is something that is driving auto insurance rates upward. What is driving auto insurance rates upward is about what I'm about to tell you about. Unfortunately, first, the tragic news. Auto fatalities are absolutely soaring in the state of Georgia, and they're even moving in a more adverse direction than the United States overall. Most of these deaths in Georgia are due to an increase in unsafe driving behaviors. I'm not telling you anything that you probably haven't heard from GDOT and other sources or from the state police. But here you have it. In 2022, we have automobile deaths in Georgia estimated at nearly 1,900. That's an increase of 3.8% from last year. And you can see how sharply those numbers have increased since 2019. So they're far above what they were prior to COVID. And despite the pandemic and people driving less, people are getting in more severe and particularly fatal accidents. This is being reflected, of course, in very expensive costs per claim. In other words, severities in terms of claims, and I'll talk about that in a moment. In the United States overall, actual automobile fatalities are down slightly in 2022, about 0.2%. But again, they're up nearly 4% in the state of Georgia. So Georgia is moving in the wrong direction here in a fairly big way. Using data from the Georgia Department of Transportation, again, not insurance data. Why are people dying on the roads in the state of Georgia today? 56% of people who died in highway accidents, in fact, were not wearing their seatbelts. About 76% were associated with unsafe driving behaviors, particularly distracted driving, excessive speed, as well as intoxication is a huge problem. And I think something that many people don't know is that a lot of pedestrians are being taken out in the process as well. About 17% of highway deaths are actually pedestrians who are killed by drivers. So again, some very sad news there. Now, all of this fits into what we are seeing in the insurance world beyond just claims that are associated with deaths. These are very severe claims I've talked about so far, of course, and of course, it's going to be the case that this translates into non-fatal claims as well. I do want you to understand, however, that the fact of the matter is that auto insurance is not a market in the state of Georgia that could be characterized by excessive profitability in any sort of a way. You'll probably hear about rate increases later on, but the reality of it is that Georgia is a profit laggard in terms of private passenger auto insurance. This shows the return on net worth for private passenger auto. Georgia in red versus the U.S. overall. And the data only run through 2020 at this point, but the average is 3.4% in Georgia versus close to 6% for the U.S. overall. And by the way, the Fortune 500, the average companies we see out there, Coca-Cola and Delta and big companies like that, some of which are based here in Georgia, the average ROE, return on equity, is about 14%. So the insurance industry is lower than the Fortune 500, and auto insurance is lower than that, and Georgia is lower still. So again, no evidence whatsoever of excessive profitability in the private passenger auto market here in the state compared to the U.S. or even compared to our neighbors in the Southeast. Georgia is the dotted gray line here. The other states are your neighbors in the Southeast. And what you can see is that in terms of comparing against Tennessee, Florida, Alabama, and South Carolina, Georgia has the lowest profitability of all these southeastern states, in addition to being materially lower than the U.S. overall. So again, that underscores the point that, again, there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that the rating structure and the rates that we see in place in Georgia today are leading to anything that one could consider above average in terms of profitability. Now, let me get into the nitty-gritty data that insurers actually see, talking about automobile severity. In other words, the average cost per claim very much mirrors what we're seeing in the GDOT and the NHTSA sort of data that we're seeing. And of course, inflation is something that's also pressuring up costs as well. Now, nationally, when we look at loss ratios, the ratio of what we pay out to what we take in, not including the insurer's overhead expenses, we can see that those are up very sharply, up about 24 points since prior to COVID. That's a very, very sharp increase. What that suggests is that the cost of claims is rising far and away at a pace far and away above that of the rate at which rates are increasing. In other words, rates are not keeping up with the underlying trends, which include these dangerous behaviors on the road, as well as inflation itself. Speaking of inflation, we know that last year was the worst year in 40 years. We had 8% inflation rate nationally. And if I drill down a little bit and take a look right here in the Atlanta metro area, what we could see in orange, the orange line, is we could see that inflation has proceeded at a faster pace here in the Atlanta area compared to the U.S. city average overall. So that's another factor when we're talking about one of the nation's largest metropolitan areas. There are some factors at play here that are driving costs up faster than we're seeing in the rest of the U.S. To quantify this for you, when we look at the average cost per claim, the average severity for the major coverages that we see, collision coverage, we're up about 41% since 2020, about 36% in property damage liability, bodily injury liability of 23%, and comprehensive a little bit less so. That's a little bit more weather-related driven. Taking another look at severities, for instance, bodily injury, where it's very sensitive to medical costs, for instance, and of course to the unsafe driving behaviors. What we see here is that the severities are increasing quite steadily, up about 40% since the beginning of 2019, and really accelerating over the past 2 years or so. And while frequency fell during COVID, it's beginning to come back up. So even though we have seen frequency is still down a bit compared to where it was prior to COVID, The reality of it is that the effect from the rising average cost per claim so swamps the decline in frequency that the overall impact on rates is, or the pressure on rates is one that is significant in the upward direction. I'll give you some actual numbers, Hal, here right now, looking at the last several years and then kind of a little countdown by quarter. What we saw last year is bodily injury claims and private passenger auto in Georgia reach an all-time record high of $26,578. It's just a hair off of that right now, so very near the record numbers that we saw and far above, about 26% above what we were in 2020. And you can see the change, the incremental changes here in percent terms, up 15% in 2021, up over 9% in the data that we have so far through 2022. So those are pretty sharp numbers back to back that we've seen. When we move over to property damage liability, the damage that you might do to someone else's vehicle or to their property, crashing into their house, something like that, you can see that the average cost per claim there is now over $6,200. That is up more than 35% from 2020. So this is up very sharply, and again, part of this is due, of course, to inflation. So you can imagine the impact that this is having on insurer loss ratios. Insurers are seeing material double-digit increases across the board in most coverages. This is why you are seeing double-digit rate increases being filed by insurers. It precisely mirrors the experience that they are seeing literally on the road every day. And this is pressure insurers have been seeing for the last several years and even in the most recent quarter for which data are available. And again, you can see the percent increases year over year in the last 3 quarters for which we have data, up about 20% on average in those last 3 quarters. Moving over to collision, this is what we most commonly think of when we think about automobile accidents, hitting a record high of about $6,000 per claim early in 2022, and it's essentially there right now. Very little changed from that in the most recent data point that we have. And so here we see the average collision claim is up more than 41% compared to what it was in 2020. This precisely mirrors, again, some of the increases that you've seen filed in the state. And here you can see it on a quarterly basis. These are very substantial quarterly increases on a year over year. So for instance, first quarter 2022 over first quarter 2021, 26%. Okay, so the pace has ebbed a little bit, but nevertheless, these are very severe increases, and we are not seeing a decrease in the cost of claims. What we are seeing is a deceleration of the increase in the cost of claims. So that's a different order effect. Nobody is expecting that the average cost of repairing vehicles, for instance, is going to go back down to where it was prior to COVID, in the same way that you probably don't have the expectation that the mechanics working on the cars are going to take wage cuts that are going to bring them back to where they were in 2019, or the price of cars or parts are going to go back to the way they were in 2019. We might wish that, but that's not going to happen. So what has to happen is insurance rates have to adjust to this new plateau. Insurance rates adjust only with a lag, and that's where we are right now. In terms of the loss ratio for collision, for instance, we can see that in Georgia, we have had, compared to the 5-year average prior to COVID, we see that the loss ratio has jumped 20 points exactly. And again, what that means is that the increase in auto rates that you have been experiencing has not even come close to capturing the experience the insurers have been seeing on the other end when they are paying out claims, as they have been for the past couple of years in this new, relatively high inflation, dangerous driving behavior environment that we have. In terms of comprehensive claims, here you do see some inflation as well. Again, this could be driven a little bit by weather-related issues. This is up about 27% since 2019 prior to COVID. So it's a big increase nevertheless. And this is in part driven by something that we don't often think about, is the record or near record catastrophe losses that we've been experiencing around the country. And weather events do cause billions of dollars of damage to vehicles every year. We often forget about that. But again, you don't have to go far to hear about the bad weather here in Georgia and everywhere else, including things like flooding, which is actually covered in your automobile, for your automobile, unlike for your home. Now, I want to conclude on a couple of issues here related specifically to a couple of specific factors that kind of go into the cost of auto insurance. Think about new vehicles, new vehicle costs. Lots were empty. Hard to buy a car. If any of you have been in the market for a new car the last couple of years, it was a painful process, wasn't it? Same thing for a used car. Well, at their peak, new car prices were increasing at a 13% annual clip in April of last year. They're still increasing at about a 6% annual pace. We haven't seen numbers like this since 1975. All right, so very severe inflation, and the price of new cars is not going down. Again, what this chart represents is just a deceleration in terms of the increase in the price of new vehicles. So new vehicle prices keep hitting new record highs all the time. In terms of used cars and trucks, what we saw is by the end of 2022, those prices were up about almost 40% for used cars and trucks. And these prices remain stubbornly high. Even though these prices are coming down a little bit, again, they're still 40% above where they were prior to COVID, and they were up about 55% at their peak in early 2022. But when we think about a vehicle that's in an accident that needs to be repaired, that repair takes a period of time. The insurer generally pays for a replacement vehicle. The cost of replacement vehicles has gone through the roof, up as much as 20% on an annualized basis in late 2021, still increasing by about a 5% annual pace today. So cumulatively, we have much higher cost for replacement vehicles. This is a major component of the cost of a repair. And so not only is the price of a replacement vehicle higher because rental cars were in short supply, but it is also taking much longer to get a repair done. You may have experienced this personally as well. The average length of a rental car being paid, length of the time that the insurer is paying for a rental car is now in the state of Georgia up to 21 days. That is an increase of about 8.5 days since 2020, and it makes Georgia tied for the second longest rental replacement number of days in the entire United States. You're tied with Oklahoma and second only to Louisiana. And again, as I mentioned, although there are more cars on the lots than there were a year ago, they're still in relatively short supply. The automobile manufacturers have just not been able to keep up with demand. That's what that chart shows. And then last but not least is the issue of medical cost inflation. So I separate that out. Medical cost inflation, which kind of bottomed out in the middle of 2021, has come roaring back and is now has peaked at last year, it seems, at least peaked for the time being, at about 6%, but is still increasing at about 4% as we finished 2022. And of course, this factors very heavily into bodily injury claims, as well as potentially into litigation costs as well. So to summarize, happy to take your questions. The good news, Georgia has a very competitive auto insurance market. I think we'd all agree we'd like to keep it that way. But unfortunately, Georgia's highways are becoming increasingly deadly, even relative to the rest of the United States. And the industry's claim experience mirrors this sharp increase in highway fatalities and severe accidents, the uptake in poor driving behaviors. And so we have an extremely adverse auto claim severity across the board today, whether it's bodily injury or whether we're talking about physical damage. The loss ratios have been pushed higher because of the fact that these severities, these high claim costs, have run far, far ahead of what insurers have earned in terms of rate. And so now the severities are at record highs, generally speaking, and far above where they were prior to the pandemic. Inflationary pressures remain affecting the cost of new and used cars, parts, labor, replacement vehicles, and medical care. So obviously, this translates into cost pressures for insurers, and that's what you are experiencing as Georgians today. So thank you very much for your time, your attention. I'm sure we'll make sure the committee has an electronic version of this as well, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Dr. Hartwig.
Thank
You're
you, sir.
always very informative, and it's real good to have the data that you bring us instead of trying to make decisions based on just anecdotal evidence we might hear on the street. I do want to let the committee members know that he's made his presentation available to us, his slideshow, and my office will be emailing that out to each of you. So we do have some questions, Dr.
Sure.
Hartwig. First, I'm gonna call on Senator Kirkpatrick.
Thank you very much for your presentation, very informative and scary. I had two questions. One is your pedestrian and fatality statistics. I've been working with GDOT and the Governor's Office on Highway Safety on that issue, and I was just wondering if that included bicycle fatalities?
Typically it does. It includes cyclists as well, yes.
Okay, and then the other question is, I'm assuming that the bodily injury medical costs track, that the litigation costs kind of track with that. Is that accurate, or are there other factors?
Yeah, so certainly such thing as the underlying pace of medical inflation overall affects bodily injury costs, bodily injury claim severity. But yes, there is an element of the litigation environment that does drive that as well. As you probably all know, the litigation environment surrounding private passenger auto is a very active one in Georgia and around the country. And so there's no doubt an impact both on frequency. In other words, there are claims that arise that otherwise may not have arisen, and that the severity of the claims, and others, the average cost of those claims may also be driven up as a result of that litigation. So those litigation costs are in some way, shape, or form built into the system and ultimately have to be passed through into consumers, policyholders.
All right, next I will call the Dean of the Senate, Senator Harbison, and you were a little bit late getting here, and we all introduced ourselves. So if you start out by introducing yourself, your district, where you represent. So
Good afternoon. My name is Ed Harbison. I represent the 15th Senatorial District in Columbus and 7 other counties, Macon, Marion, Taylor, Tarleton, Schley, and Chattahoochee counties, which includes Fort Benning. And this is my 31st year in the Georgia Senate, and I'm just honored to be a member of this very excellent committee with these very august members in here who I learn a lot from. So I'm just glad to be here. But my question and observation, would you repeat that good news again? It got lost in the train. Georgia,
Yeah, what was good?
Pedestrians getting killed, and Georgia is worse than the country. It's just
Yeah, you know, I've heard The Walking Dead is filmed here in Georgia too, so this is not, but, and I don't mean it to be as morbid as that, but I saved the good news for the beginning, which was the fact that Georgia has a very, very competitive auto insurance market. Meaning, in this case, there are about over 200 auto insurance carriers who
I got
compete
that.
for your business, right?
Right.
So that's the very good news that we have here, and that kind of competition does, to the extent possible, help keep rates down. And it allows people, if, for instance, their carrier increases rates by an amount they consider to be unacceptable, this day and age, through the competition, through the very nature of the fact that this is a very competitive market, and through technology, people have the opportunity to have more rate quotes faster than they ever have in history. And if they're unsatisfied because of the price or the quality they're receiving, they can change carriers more readily and more easily than ever. And that's good news.
And if I may, the other part about, I think it was 2019, and then that was a great, huge drop in there with that red line. And it's just, and then people come back speeding and just driving and getting tickets and killing. I'm just wondering, what is the cause of all that? People are just angry, or they're just are driving faster, they don't care anymore, or they've been watching Atlanta 500 too much or something like that. But I encourage you to watch Atlanta 500. I don't mean that like that. I don't mean that like that. But I'm just curious about that. It's just
right.
really stuck out.
And it's a very complex answer, and it's a very complex solution. So clearly the frequency dropped during COVID because fewer people were driving. I mean, many places of business were closed, people were working remote, schools were closed, and we all know that story. Frequency is beginning to make its way back, but although it has not fully recovered. But what did happen is those people who got on the road were able to drive faster. So there's definitely an increased incidence of people who are driving faster on roads, and particularly in rural areas, but not necessarily isolated to rural areas. That created the possibility for more severe accidents. So anytime accidents occur at a higher rate of speed, the odds are there's a greater probability that someone will be severely injured or in fact killed, and also that the vehicle will be more severely damaged, if not completely totaled. That is part of it. Beyond that, there are a lot of other issues. I mean, okay, another piece of good news. You asked about this, Senator. Georgia is a state of destination for people around the country. People want to move here. They want to work here. They like the lower cost of living here. There are a lot of job opportunities here. They might want to retire here. It's a very military-friendly state. That's all good news. But you got to pack all the people inside the same borders. Your counties haven't gotten any larger, the state's borders haven't gotten any larger, and what also hasn't happened is the state's infrastructure hasn't kept up with the population gains. So you've got, whenever you have a higher traffic density environment, you're going to increase the frequency of accidents and generally going to increase the severity of the accidents, at least in urbanized areas, and also to some degree in more rural areas. And more sadly, you've got some other things happening, not just in Georgia in the United States. You've got more people who aren't buckling up. GDOT said 56% of the people aren't wearing seatbelts who are involved in fatal accidents. 76% were either distracted or they were impaired or they were speeding or some combination thereof, usually multiple things. So those are all things to be concerned about. And I am sort of the messenger for that. Insurers do charge people more who have poor driving behaviors. For instance, you get a DUI, you're going to pay a lot more. You get a ticket for speeding, you're going to pay more. So to the extent that insurance rates are sensitive to those kind of poor driving behaviors and the increase in poor driving behaviors, I think we'd all agree that that kind of system is one that is appropriate, that individuals who can maintain a good driving record, drive carefully, safely, aren't involved in wrecks, are going to pay less than people who do. But unfortunately, a lot of this is happening beyond the purview of insurers, and it's within the purview of law enforcement. It's within the purview of the state to make appropriate investments in infrastructure. And I suggested to the House Committee this morning when asked a very similar question, how to understand this. For instance, GDOT has dug into some of the data, understanding why people are killed. We could find out why people are severely injured as well on the roads of Georgia and why it continues to increase. Digging into these claims and understanding who's being involved in these accidents, where they're being involved in these accidents, what were the factors associated with those accidents will give you a good sense of what you're dealing with, and then hopefully you'll find at least some low-hanging fruit, so to speak. What are the things that we can attack most quickly to have the largest benefit in order to kind of end the killing on the roads here in Georgia and bring down that fatality rate and make Georgia's roads at least as safe as they were prior to COVID, because we're absolutely moving in the wrong direction right now.
Chairman.
Thank you.
Two more questions. Our Vice Chairman, Senator Harwood.
Hardwood, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you,
If you
sir.
could get this into a point that we could put on our Facebook page to explain why insurance rates are going up, it would save us a lot of time. But I say that in honesty, there are a couple of things. Number one, thank you for the information. Last time you did a great job, and again, bringing information to us, and numbers do not necessarily lie. They tell us the story of trending of where we're going. I think the 211 companies, 200 plus companies, says that free market is a great way to be. I've been in places, in other states where there's very few. We are blessed to have competition, and I believe that free market addresses that. The seatbelt is surprising that 56% of that involves seatbelts. That's very, very interesting as I deal with commercial accounts that need to look at that because that affects workers' comp and other things of that nature. I was very interested, though, in the issues of drinking and driving and drugs and driving. My last numbers I saw is that alcohol was involved in about 50% of the accidents, and I don't know whether that's true or not. I wanted to kind of see if you had any numbers on that.
The number is very high, and sometimes that's in combination with drug use. So that could be anything from marijuana to opioids, which is, of course, one of the major addictive substances we've seen explode over the past couple of years. Fentanyl, things like this, very problematic. A few years ago, I didn't know what fentanyl was, to be honest with you, and now you hear about it every day, and it is unfortunately, something that you're going to find involved in automobile accidents, and so it's a complex and really toxic stew of things that are happening out there. It's amazing, quite frankly, that people do not seem to understand there's a connection between their ability to drive or lack thereof and the substances that they are ingesting. And we're talking about a state here where marijuana is not even legal.
That's right.
So it's clearly a problem.
That says this, if you're gonna drink, at least wear your seatbelt, and you get at least you're breaking even on that side. correct?
Potentially, but many of these they are killing other people. So
Yeah,
you
it
can still
is.
wind up killing
Absolutely.
someone else. So that's the sad part about it.
Let me address this, and this is one of the things that we're seeing through our book of business, is the underinsured motorist is a
Yeah.
very major issue. When we have currently 25, 50, 25 limits in the state of Georgia, there's not many cars that you're buying, especially brand new, that are under the $25,000 mark. Do your numbers anywhere, or your experience, tell us any difference as far as limits and what we're dealing with there?
Well, okay, so back to the uninsured motorist issue for a second. So I don't have the numbers for Georgia, but the number nationally is somewhere around 13% of drivers are driving around without any insurance. And we're talking about underinsurance, it's even a larger proportion there. So we're talking about no insurance in some
Right.
cases, and then being underinsured. So there's no question that the UIM coverages are being impacted here as well. I didn't break those out separately because I don't actually have the data to do that, but unquestionably, it's impacted as well.
If I go back home, I'm gonna tell them, wear their seatbelts, don't drink, and carry good uninsured motorist limits to be covered properly, right?
There you go. That's a good start. That's a good start. Don't speed either. Yeah. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir, appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Senator Robertson.
I'm gonna be brief. I know you've been up here for a while.
Can you use the mic too?
That one's lights on. Yeah.
That one's working now. Yes, Dr. Harwick, you said 70% of highway deaths are pedestrian. Is that a national average?
No, 17%
That's
in
what I-
Georgia. Oh, I thought you said 70. I'm
No, I
sorry
said
about
17.
that. 17.
Is
okay.
that's in Georgia?
That was Georgia. That was
Okay.
Georgia. Yes.
I want to be clear on that. And when you, the high claim costs, you say you factor in the litigation costs into that?
Yes, that would be part of the part of the claim cost.
And
yes.
where does Georgia rate?
I don't, I could give you an enumeration of where Georgia rates in terms of bodily injury severity. I haven't done that, but I could bring that to the committee. We have to be a little bit cautious in terms of interstate comparisons here. So, for instance, in a New York State, you'll see that bodily injury claim severity is higher than it is in Georgia. Now, that's in part because of the unique nature of New York City and things like that, and maybe not quite so much associated with the litigation environment, whereas the litigation environment is quite intense in a place like Georgia or South Carolina and Florida, for that matter. So I would have to discuss with some of my colleagues, but to see
Real quick, what do you define as intense?
as intense, I would be talking about, let's say, litigation and defense costs that are double-digit proportion of the overall bodily injury claim.
Okay, good, thank you, I appreciate that.
We'll do one more question. Senator Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hartman, for coming in. You
Thank you.
gave some very informative information, and I'm not, although shocking, I'm not surprised, because my argument is we have too many cars on the road, and we do not have transportation solution here in Georgia. So that kind of forms my question, as we do have, one of the worst in the country, and our rates are higher, I think you said, than some that are comparable cities, I would think, to us. What's the correlation between those cities' lower rate and having a transportation solution and ours being high and that we don't have one, and we have not addressed transportation in a significant
Right.
way?
Okay, so that's an analysis I have not done, but not surprisingly. But let me just put it this way, and I think it's something I mentioned when I was speaking earlier. There's no question that there's a correlation between traffic density and frequency and severity of accidents. And there's no question, and this was my personal experience driving here this morning, where it took me an hour
Try
to get
coming out of
about 10
Gwinnett
miles. That the traffic intensity, or density, I should say, here in Georgia is bad, and it is getting worse. And I don't think that's confined here to the metro Atlanta area either. You can find it in Augusta. You can find it outside of Savannah. And in other places as
Because we have
well.
so many people wanting to move here
Well,
now.
well,
to
right.
your
So that
point.
it's not surprising that the infrastructure is lagging behind the popularity of the state. So the popularity of the state and its ability to grow jobs is lagging its ability to invest in the appropriate infrastructure to manage the increased throughput of vehicles on the road. Going along with that is an increased burden for police, for instance, to monitor. So this means more people speeding. It means more people engaging in reckless behaviors, more people driving without seatbelts, and so forth. There's a question about investment in infrastructure, the investment in enforcement. We have distracted driving issues as well. And so that's why it's, I think somebody else asked, it's a very complex solution. It is not just a matter of saying rates are too high, let's do something to hold them in place. That is not going to fix the underlying disease that is literally killing Georgians by the thousands every year on the highways, and leading to all kinds of terrible situations in terms of very severe, we haven't even talked about the severe injuries and so forth, but you can see that in the bodily injury severity numbers as well. So it's a tragedy, and I do believe with an appropriate analysis, appropriate study, that there is some, there will be some remediation that is possible. Some, as I mentioned, low-hanging fruit, some solutions that can help, bring these numbers down back at a reasonable target would be back to where they were prior to COVID. That would be where I would start anyway. Taking a good hard look at what's driving this, what can we do to fix it?
Thank you so much, Dr. Hart. We appreciate your time and traveling to visit with us. It's very helpful.
Thank you, sir. My pleasure, and anytime.
All right, thank you. I want to welcome our Insurance and Safety Fire Commissioner to the meeting. Glad to have you, General King. He's a real American hero and a good friend of all of ours, and glad to have you with us today. I'm going to back up a little bit now, and you've got in your folder, stapled to the front of your, inside of your folder, our committee rules. And since this is our first meeting of a new biennial, we need to adopt these rules. I did not make any changes to them. They're just like they were with our prior chairman and the prior biennial. But I'll give you a minute if you would take a minute to look those over, and we need to adopt our rules. Yes, ma'am. All right, I got a motion to do pass, Senator Harbison, and a second, Senator Kirkpatrick. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. All right, there you are, adopted. Thank you. Also, I want to draw your attention on your stapled to your agenda. It's page 2. I'm establishing, just like Chairman Burke had done in the past, I'm establishing 2 subcommittees for our main committee, and you'll see those 2 listed there. Just want to draw your attention to that. All right, next we have the honor of having Steve Manders with us to give us a presentation on what they're seeing at the Department of Insurance. Weston, did you want to speak too, or you good? Okay.
I'm Weston Burleson with the Insurance Commissioner's Office. I do our legislative affairs. We had seen Dr. Hartwig's presentation in the past, and he does a really good job of laying out, what's driving costs. And we thought this year it might be helpful to have Steve Manders. He's our Deputy Commissioner for Insurance Regulation. Just talk about what we look at as a regulatory agency when the filings come to us, when the loss ratios, with the data we're seeing, sort of the next steps we take, and maybe some of the laws governing the insurance market in Georgia.
As the commissioner would say, I work in the area where the sausage is made. That's where it all comes together.
Steve, pull that mic closer to you if you would, and
Okay.
Are you still an umpire?
No, sir, retired about 10 years ago.
Okay.
So my second life was I was an NCAA baseball umpire with the ACC and SEC. So I got to travel around the country. Excuse my voice, Chairman, I'm a little raspy today. So we'll get through this. Appreciate y'all's time. I've met a lot of you before in the past. Our department receives about 10,000 filings a year between life and health and the property and casualty side of the filings, and probably 5,000 of them are personal lines, either auto and homeowners filings. We currently have an electronic filing system. NAIC. wrong job. NAIC has developed for all the states an electronic filing system, so the company can correspond with us, submit a filing electronically. We can correspond with them in that filing. All that's public. Y'all can go in and look at those filings electronically. There's components of the filings you cannot review, such as credit scoring models. That by statute is proprietary. But so any of the base rates, any of the rating plans, any of their forms, all that is public information and is available. We get open record requests on that quite frequently. Just to touch real quickly on our filing laws and how the system and the laws that we have to work under. All forms are prior approval. They have to be submitted to our office 90 days prior to their effective date. We have 90 days to review those filings. We can extend that under the current laws 60 additional days if we need. If it's a complicated issue or something new, say ISO's coming out with a brand new rating plan for something, it may take longer than 90 days to get through the filing. So all forms are prior approval. Rates, it's a little different. Every line of insurance in the state, except for private passenger auto, is file and use with the 45-day waiting period. So we get a chance to look at that filing 45 days before it goes into effect. The companies, after that 45 days, they can implement that filing. We can examine the filing and stop the clock on that. Auto, we cannot. So the filing comes in, we have 90 days. Once we stop the clock, we have 90 days to do our review, and 60 days, we can extend that 60 days. So that's every other line of insurance. That's med mal, commercial property, homeowners, workers' comp. Every line of insurance falls under that filing system other than private passenger auto. Private passenger auto, we have a dual system. We have prior approval for minimum limit policyholders, not your minimum limit coverages, minimum limit policyholders. So as mentioned earlier, 25, 50, 25 is our minimum limits. So if a company writes 25, 50, 25 with or MedPay, or if they write 25, 50, 30, as some of them are doing, as their minimum limits, they get to implement that filing immediately with no waiting period. So that falls under the filing use, but in the private passenger auto arena, the filing use does not have a waiting period. It can go into effect as soon as it hits our door, which has presented some problems in the past. As you saw the numbers, the numbers are bad. 4 or 5 years ago, we were probably seeing lower, middle, single-digit filings, 4, 5, 6% range, somewhere in that area. Now we're starting to see more filings in the teens. As you probably have seen in the press, we had one of our major insurers do the filing use with a 25% increase. Nobody really mentioned that that was on top of a 14.9% increase several months before that. So the policyholders in that one company saw over a 43% increase in rates on average. Some saw more, some saw less. So, you know, that is one of the items we have to look at. You know, is it, yes, the numbers those rates can be supported. They can most of the time when the companies submit a filing. But from a public policy standpoint, we feel like we ought to at least have a discussion and temper some of those larger increases. That, you know, those numbers didn't happen overnight to get there, and you're not going to fix the problem overnight. We feel like there needs to be more of a balanced approach on at least have a negotiation, a discussion before the rates go into effect. And to complicate things a little further, not only are we talking about rate here, we're talking about these insurance scoring models. So the insurance company are using these analytical models to rate the policies. They'll come up with an insurance score. It usually has a component of your credit score is included in that. But now we're seeing filings, how many family dollars are within a 5-mile radius of your house? They're gonna charge you a higher rate if you have 5 family dollars versus you have 2 family dollars within 5-mile radius of your residence. So we're starting to see a lot of different things in these filings that we have never seen before. And we are having those discussions. Some of these rates are already in effect, but we are having those discussions to have the companies pull those rating variables out of the filings. We don't allow education and occupation into the rating of an auto policy. Every state has income. You cannot use income as a rating variable to rate an auto policy. It's prohibited in every state. But if you start using education and occupation, are we not trying to backdoor and use that as a surrogate for education and occupation? So those are the type public policy issues that we have to work through and what variables we're going to allow. So now when we set up the filing rules for the companies and they submit their filing in SURF and we get a broad list of every variable they're going to use in the filing. There may be 200 variables in some of these filings now. It's extremely complicated. And so that's just one of the obstacles that we run into when we talk about rates and models. In private passenger auto, we have about 35 companies now that are using the filing use provision and not making a prior approval filing. So out of the 200 companies, 35 of them are implementing their rates immediately. And some of them are pretty large companies. We're probably market share, we're probably talking about 15 or 20% of the market share. So we have 3 fairly large companies that are utilizing. But that leaves 170 companies that basically treat everything as prior approval. Some companies want our stamp of approval on it before they implement the rates. They don't want to have a problem later down the road, say, hey, we didn't realize you were using education in the rating of your policy. We're going to have you take that out. And anybody you surcharge for that, we think ought to be refunded. They don't want to have to go through that process. So a lot of companies do work with us and do have the discussions on the front end. But the way our law is, excuse me, currently written, it does allow them to implement their rates immediately without any review or oversight on our part. That's just sort of our filing rules. You know, those are statutes. All that's built into the statute. They have evolved over time. The forms provision of the law has not changed. It's always been prior approval. Private passenger auto used to be prior approval back years ago. And I'm not saying there were not some abuses with prior administrations that extended the clock on some of those reviews. It could have been a little more speed to market. But I can tell you this, I've been through many I've been in the department 36 years, and I've been through many of administration. And we can, we can talk about rate and our rates going up. And gentlemen, y'all been here in the market long enough to know what happens if there's no market. If you go out there to shop an auto policy and there's no, sir, you used to be an agent. You were an agent at one time. And when you went to that consumer and say, I have nobody that will quote your account. And as Dr. Harwood said, we do have a competitive market. Our auto plan, our assigned risk auto plan has 0 policies in it for auto. Doesn't even have any commercial accounts in it. There's no business. So that's telling us our market is competitive. But unfortunately, with the underlying data, you can see it's going to get more expensive. And we just want to be able to represent the consumers in a fair manner and have a chance to look at something before it hits the streets. So,
All right, do you mind to take a question?
no, sir.
All right, Senator Lucas.
Well, it's not a question, but I just like to tell you that I want to commend you for handling cases. I've had folks who've come to me that had problems with insurance, and I basically call you all, and y'all take it from there, and the people are mostly satisfied.
We have a real, our consumer services area is very seasoned, a lot of experience. Ms. Oney's the director, and she has a good leadership team up under her. And we do, somebody was grading the consumer services area. I saw something, and we were in pretty close to the top 10 from our consumer services compared to other states on getting cases handled. But I appreciate that.
I mean, they call me all frustrated. I end up trying to take the information, he call you all, and I give you the person's name and who the so-called insurance company is, and someone that's we know about them, we'll take care of them.
All right, Senator Harbin, you have a question.
Well, I just want to thank Steve. Been around around a while. We've been there. I think that the realization, and I appreciate your sensitivity really to where the market is. It is different because when I'm talking to companies, they also have other states they operate in, and profit is better there. They can move capital there, and that's the part I think that we have to be mindful of, is they do have some ability. I've had people say my rates are too high. I said, have you tried anywhere else? And says, yeah, but you're lower than they are. I said, yeah. And I think part of the issue is the consumer has to understand what we're faced with. And this guy tells me he's never used his insurance. He sees my rates went up. I said, you've never used your life insurance either. And he didn't like that at all. But I appreciate understanding free market, because these companies do have the ability, and we see this. Florida has a lot of issues going on with it as it is with weather related and otherwise. And we are having even capacity issues in commercial insurance with getting higher limits because of our legal environment that we're dealing with. But I think especially this affects so many consumers as far as that portion. And I think the presentation, I wish I could kind of put that in and say, hey, here it is, let me play it for you. But realizing that there's not a car out there you can buy brand new probably for $25,000. You may get a moped, but that's about it.
Insurance is an intangible product, and that's what folks have a hard time getting their hands around. But, I'm not going in the store buying something, I'm buying a promise, and so it is it's a tough sale, and we have been working with the industry. We have given some larger increases than what we have in the past. We know, we see the numbers, we see it in the filings, and our job, we feel like our job is to be that middle person, and the industry is never as good as they think it is, and it's never as bad as they think it is.
You are a referee, correct?
Yes, sir.
You are also playing referee where you are now.
Yes, sir.
And the biggest thing is we don't want the players to walk off the field. We need the players on the field. And I thank you for doing the job you do. Thank you very much.
I'm used to getting hollered at, so.
Steve, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate all you all do at the department. We'll look forward to working with you on some of these issues. Thank you. All right, our time's about up. We have 6 bills that have been assigned to this committee. Only so far, one of the bill authors has asked me to hear her bill. I hadn't heard from the other bill authors, so I encourage them to get with me if they want a hearing on their bill. But Senate Bill 20, authored by Senator Kirkpatrick, has to do with health insurance network adequacy, and I'm going to assign that Senate Bill 20 to the Life, Health, and Specialty Subcommittee chaired by Senator Harbin. And Senator Harbin, my admin, a very able admin here, Kylan, will help you schedule a meeting so that you all can vet that bill and come back to us as quickly as you can with a recommendation. All right, thank you. Is there any other business to come before the committee? All right, we stand adjourned. Thank you.